Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. So, just a few days ago, September 10th, 2025, the nation was really gripped by some truly tragic news. We're talking about the public assassination of Charles Kirk. Now, for those of you maybe less familiar, Kirk was a deeply influential American conservative activist, a political commentator, really a significant young voice in the U.S. right-wing movement. His sudden loss just sent, well, shockwaves through the whole political landscape. And this kind of tragedy immediately makes you wonder, doesn't it? Can celestial patterns, astrology, offer any foresight into major national events like this? Could there possibly have been some kind of astrological warning sign written in the stars?
It's a really powerful question, and one a lot of people ask, especially after something like this. Now, while we don't have Charles Kirk's precise birth time, and that's absolutely essential for a detailed personal chart.
Right, you need that exact moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we can turn our attention to the birth chart of the United States itself.
Ah, yes. We're talking about the famous Sibley Chart. We really wanted to see if such a pivotal national event, affecting a prominent young leader like Kirk, might somehow be reflected in the astrological blueprint of the nation. But here's the crucial challenge, right? The event already happened. So how do we avoid that trap of hindsight bias, where you just look for clues after you already know the answer? We knew we needed a really rigorous method.
And this is precisely where our experiment comes in. We basically tasked an AI with a truly blind guess.
Okay, tell us more. How did that work? We fed the AI all the astrological data for September 10th, 2025, overlaid onto the US's Sibley chart. And then, crucially, we gave it 8 distinct, totally unrelated options for what might have happened that day. The AI had to pick one with absolutely no prior knowledge of the actual event, 0, and the result.
It correctly identified option number 2.
Right.
An important American figure was shot.
Wow. Okay. So today we're going to deep dive into that Sibley chart. We'll explore the astrological techniques the AI actually used and unpack exactly how it arrived at that, frankly, chilling prediction. This isn't just about, validating a method, although that's part of it. It's really about discovering what these intricate celestial patterns might reveal about the, let's say, enduring character and maybe even vulnerabilities of the United States. So get ready for some surprising connections here. Okay, so to start, let's unpack the very foundation of this whole analysis, the Sibley chart. What exactly is it? Why is it so significant in astrology?
Right. The Sibley chart is, well, essentially the astrological birth chart of the United States. It's cast for July 4th, 1776 at 5:04 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Philadelphia. You can think of it like the USA's unique cosmic DNA. It's astrological signature. Secular astrologers use it as a really foundational tool to understand and analyze major national events. So let's look at some key placements that are particularly telling for our discussion today.
Okay, lay it on us.
All right. First, you've got the sun in Cancer sitting in the 7th house. The sun, that represents the nation's core identity, its leadership. In Cancer, it speaks to patriotism, nurturing, a focus on home, security.
That sounds very American, yeah.
It does. But critically, it's placed in the 7th house. Now, that house rules open enemies, but also partnerships. So it suggests the nation's identity is often defined through its relationships, its alliances, but it's also, susceptible to public confrontation, conflict with adversaries.
Interesting. So relationships and enemies right there with the core identity.
Precisely. Then we have the moon in Aquarius in the 3rd house. The moon represents the collective emotional state, public sentiment, the people. In Aquarius, it hints at these strong currents of innovation, independence, even rebellion within the populace. But it also suggests a potential for sudden shifts in public mood, or maybe a kind of detachment sometimes. And the 3rd house connects all this to communication, media, local communities, travel, that sort of thing.
Okay, innovation in media.
Yeah. Now, here's a critical point for today's deep dive. Mars in Gemini, also in the 7th house. Mars is the planet of, well, war, aggression, direct action, weapons. Its placement in the 7th house, again, points directly to conflicts with adversaries or prominent public figures, open enemies. And Gemini adds this dimension related to communication, media, debate, sometimes even duplicity.
So aggressive communication or conflict involving people known for communication.
Both are possible interpretations, yeah.
Yeah.
Very volatile mix in that position. And finally, let's touch on Saturn in Libra up in the 10th house. Saturn deals with authority, structure, limitations, challenges. In the 10th house, which governs government, national reputation, leadership, it suggests inherent difficulties, tensions within the national leadership structures. And it has a challenging relationship, what we call the square, to the sun we mentioned earlier. This highlights this kind of chronic friction, obstacles for those in power, challenges to authority.
Wow. So if I'm kind of piecing this together, The U.S. chart, right from its inception, seems to show this like built-in predisposition for public discourse, communication, maybe even arguments to escalate into violent conflict, especially when these sensitive points, Mars, the Sun, Saturn, get activated by current planetary movements, what you call transits.
That's a perfect way to put it, precisely. It's like the nation carries this inherent energetic pattern, these vulnerabilities.
Okay, this brings us right back to our fascinating experiment. Because we wanted to analyze the Charles Kirk assassination astrologically, but ensure we didn't let our knowledge of the event influence the interpretation. Avoid that hindsight bias. Which is exactly why we created this blind test for the AI. So we gave it the astrological data for the Sibley Chart on September 10th, 2025, right at the time of the event. And then we gave it those 8 possible scenarios. Let me list them again quickly. 1, a severe U.S. air crash. 2, an important U.S. figure was shot. 3, a former U.S. president died. 4, the current U.S. president announced a divorce. 5, a severe U.S. explosion occurred. 6, a serious disease outbreak with the U.S. closing borders. 7, a U.S. stock market crash. And 8, the U.S. president declared war.
Right. And to make its prediction from those options, the AI used a multi-layered approach. It drew from various predictive astrological techniques. Think of each technique like putting on a different pair of glasses. Each gives you a slightly different view, but together they create a more complete picture.
Okay, so what techniques are we talking about?
Well, we looked at transits, which are basically the current planets moving over the original Sibley chart. They highlight immediate triggers, what's happening right now. Then solar arc progressions. These show how the chart evolves symbolically, year by year. They reveal longer-term developments, like themes unfolding over time.
Like watching a slow-motion replay of the chart's potential.
Exactly. That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
We also use secondary progressions, which is another symbolic timing method, and perfections. These identify the annual and monthly planetary rulers. Basically, they tell you which planet is sort of in charge or setting the theme for that specific period. And for September 2025, Venus was the annual ruler and Mars was the monthly ruler.
Mars again. So relationships and conflict highlighted right away for that month.
Right off the bat, yeah. Beyond that, we looked at Ferdaria, which outlines even longer planetary time periods, kind of like chapters in the nation's life. That pointed to Mercury with Jupiter, emphasizing communication and maybe expansion or judgment. But significantly, that Mars perfection we just mentioned, it landed in the 12th house of the perfection chart, which is often associated with hidden things, hidden enemies, self-undoing.
Okay. Hidden threats connected to Mars.
Exactly. We also examined lunar returns, which are like monthly mini-charts based on the moon's return to its natal position. And very importantly, eclipses. Eclipses act like cosmic wildcards. They amplify energies, often signaling fated or highly significant unavoidable events. And finally, we looked at harmonics and midpoints. These reveal more subtle underlying patterns of energy, tension, and activation within the chart, kind of the deeper currents.
Wow, that's a really comprehensive stack of information for the AI to sift through. A lot of layers.
It is. It needs that complexity to make a nuanced assessment.
And after analyzing all of those layers, its prediction was unequivocally option 2. An important American figure was shot.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting for me. Let's break down how. How did the AI, using all these complex calculations, arrive at that specific and, well, chillingly accurate conclusion?
Right. The AI's logic basically identified this powerful convergence of astrological configurations. You had challenging planetary relationships, what we call hard aspects. You had specific areas of the chart, the houses, being strongly activated. And you had symbolic archetypes all pointing in a similar direction. Together, they painted a pretty clear picture, astrologically speaking, of a public assassination. We can see this unfold through several key themes.
Okay, theme 1. The first, and arguably the most dominant theme, was Mars-driven violence. Remember, Mars is the planet of aggression, weapons, direct action. And the natal Mars in the USA's 7th house already suggests this predisposition for public attacks or conflicts. Now, on September 10th, Mars was exceptionally active, like really buzzing. Just before the event, actually on September 9th, transit Mars formed a powerful trine with natal Mars. A trine is generally a harmonious aspect. It signifies energies flowing easily together. But when it's Mars...
Easy flow of aggression?
Kind of, yeah. It strongly activated the nation's aggressive energy, suggesting a bold, maybe even confident targeted strike, like the energy for action was just there.
So Mars was essentially supercharged, pushing towards violent action.
Precisely. And then looking at the deeper, longer-term progressions, solar arc Mars was closely aligned, or conjunct, with natal Saturn. Now, this conjunction is, well, it's a classic, very difficult signature. It often points towards a violent, possibly fated end for a public figure. You got Mars, weapons attack merging with Saturn, death, restriction, authority figures. And this was all happening in the 10th house, the house of public status, reputation, government.
Wow. Weapons and death related to public status.
Exactly. And natal Saturn also connects to the second and third houses in the Sibley Chart, linking this event potentially to a figure known for their resources, their values, or significantly their communication. Which, perfectly describes Charles Kirk's public role.
It really does.
Adding to this intense picture, transit Mars was forming a square with natal Mercury. A square is a challenging aspect, like friction or conflict. Natal Mercury rules the 8th house, the house of death, transformation, other people's resources, and it's related to communication.
Wow.
So this square indicated that ideological arguments, verbal disputes, Mercury things, could quickly and perhaps fatally escalate into violence, the Mars influence. And as we mentioned earlier, Mars was also the monthly ruler in the perfection chart for September, keeping that focus on action, conflict, aggression very, very strong throughout that period.
Okay, so the sheer weight of Mars showing up in all these different techniques, transits, solar arcs, perfections, it's strongly pointed towards a shooting or some kind of violent, targeted attack.
Yes, overwhelmingly so.
And the 7th house activation really directed this aggression towards an individual, specifically someone seen as a partner or adversary in the public sphere, rather than, say, a widespread disaster.
That's the key distinction, yes. The 7th house points to the other, often a specific person or entity.
And Charles Kirk, as a very vocal public figure, deeply involved in national discourse, arguments even, he fits that 7th house archetype perfectly, especially with the Gemini influence on Mars connecting him directly to media and communication.
It aligns very strongly. Now, the second major theme the AI picked up on was authority and public figures under attack. This really emphasizes the 10th house, which is about public standing in government, and that 7th house, again, concerning relationships and adversaries.
Okay, so more focus on high-profile people.
Exactly. We saw solar arc sun forming a challenging square to the natal ascendant. The sun represents the national identity, the leader figure. The ascendant is like the nation's front door, its outward face of persona. So this aspect signaled a really profound disruption or challenge to a prominent leader or maybe an iconic figure representing the nation in some way. Additionally, there was a transit sun opposition to the natal moon. An opposition is like a direct confrontation across the chart. This created a significant emotional shock to the nation, to the public, the moon. And with the moon in the 3rd house of media and communication, this opposition really amplified the public outrage, the discourse surrounding the death of a prominent communicator.
So a shock felt through the media.
Very much so. Intriguingly, though, solar arc Jupiter was forming a supportive trine to the natal sun. Now, Jupiter usually brings expansion, benefits. Trine is easy flow, so you might think, oh, that's good.
Yeah, sounds positive.
Well, yes, but in the context of all these other really difficult aspects, it took on a different meaning. It suggested that the victim, like Kirk, would be sort of elevated, possibly to martyr status, a prominent figure whose death would actually have broad significance, maybe even expand their influence or legacy posthumously.
That's a really striking detail. So tragic, yes, but also potentially defining the victim's place in history in a bigger way.
It implies that, yes, so this strong emphasis on public status, 10th house, and key relationships or adversaries, 7th house, clearly indicated harm to a specific high-profile individual, not, a broad institutional collapse or something.
And Kirk's role, pushing innovative, sometimes rebellious ideas that aligns with the Aquarius moon themes we talked about too, right?
It does. The themes resonate across the chart activations.
Okay, so we have Mars-driven violence, attacks on public figures. What was the third theme?
The third theme involved more subtle, complex influences, deception, chaos, and hidden enemies. This is where planets like Neptune and Pluto come into play.
Oh, the outer planets. The deep stuff.
Exactly. We saw transit Mars forming that strong square to natal Neptune. And this actually reinforces an existing square between Mars and Neptune in the birth chart itself. It's like poking an old wound. Neptune sitting in the 9th house of ideologies, beliefs, foreign affairs. When it's squared by Mars, aggression, it strongly suggests a violent act that's perhaps disguised, maybe confusing, or cloaked in ideological motivations. It's a classic astrological signature for political assassination, where the motives might be murky or misrepresented.
Ideological violence, maybe with confusion around it?
Precisely. Furthermore, solar arc Neptune was very tightly conjunct natal Mercury, almost exact. This conjunction signals potential confusion, deception, or even outright misinformation surrounding the communication about the event. And with natal Mercury being retrograde in the Sibley chart, it sort of doubles down on that potential for misleading narratives, misunderstandings, or maybe difficulty getting to the clear truth of what happened in the aftermath.
So confusion layered on top of the ideological conflict.
Yes. And then we also saw a solar arc Pluto squaring natal Venus and Jupiter. Pluto represents power, death, transformation, things hidden beneath the surface, these challenging aspects, these squares to Venus, values, allies, relationships, and Jupiter, expansion, prominence, beliefs, especially with Venus and Jupiter being in that seventh house. Well, it pointed to really transformative, maybe even destructive impacts on national relationships, alliances, and significant public figures. Pluto brings intensity and finality. And remember that monthly perfection ruler, Mars. It also governed the 12th house in that chart, the house of secrets, hidden enemies, confinement, self-undoing. That strongly implied a clandestine element, maybe a conspiracy or an attack from an unseen source.
Okay, wow. So the Neptune involvement suggests maybe a stealthy attack, something unexpected rather than open warfare. And Pluto brings that sense of irreversible loss, a deep transformation. It really does all come together to paint a picture of it, well, a hidden, ideologically motivated strike.
It forms a very coherent, though disturbing picture, astrologically. And these complex influences were further amplified, like turning up the volume, by eclipses and planetary ingresses. They act like cosmic magnifying glasses or triggers.
Right. You mentioned eclipses earlier.
Yes, a total lunar eclipse occurred on September 7th, just 3 days before the event, in Pisces. Eclipses, especially total ones, often signal these fated events, major turning points. And this one directly aspected or connected with several key points in the U.S. chart, including the Sun and Mars. Lunar eclipses, especially in watery Pisces ruled by Neptune, can bring themes of dissolution, high emotion, confusion, and sometimes, unfortunately, collective grief or even violence.
So just days before,
Yeah.
like a foreshadowing.
It certainly looks that way in hindsight. And then a partial solar eclipse was building, set to occur on September 21st in Virgo. Even though it hadn't happened yet, its energy was building from September 10th onwards. This eclipse placed a strong focus on transformation, often through endings, right near the 10th house cusp, the angle related to government and public image. It indicated a coming disruption to the nation's balance of power or its reputation.
So the event happened between these two powerful eclipses.
Exactly, right in that high energy window. We also noted planetary ingresses, that's just planets moving into new zodiac signs. Mars was preparing to enter Scorpio on September 22nd. Scorpio is a sign Mars rules, known for intense, deep-seated, often covert action. So Mars moving there would further intensify these violent, potentially hidden themes.
Okay, so these eclipses, especially that lunar one right before, acted as potent catalysts, almost symbolically eclipsing the life of a significant figure. And the build-up to the solar eclipse highlighted that disruption to the nation's public image or leadership structure.
Precisely. And finally, just briefly, the AI also looked at more subtle patterns. Things like harmonic charts. In the fifth harmonic chart, for instance, which relates to creativity but also risk and sometimes destructive energy, there was a tight Mars-Pluto conjunction, raw power struggle. And the overall distribution of planets in the chart for that day was telling. About half the planets were in what we call angular houses. These are the houses, 1st, 4th, 7th, 10th, that represent the most direct, public, and impactful areas of life. This signaled an event that would strike right at the core of the nation's identity and public life, not something minor or hidden away.
So every layer, from the big transits down to the subtle harmonics, seemed to point in a consistent direction.
A remarkable convergence, yes.
Okay, so with all that powerful astrological data converging on this specific type of violent event, let's address the flip side. Why didn't the AI choose the other options we gave it? This is where the discernment of astrological interpretation really has to shine, right? How did it rule things out?
Exactly. This is just as important as identifying what did fit. For instance, it wasn't likely to be a severe air crash, #1, or explosion, #5. Why? Because those types of sudden, chaotic, often technology-related events typically have very strong signatures from the planet, Uranus, sudden shocks, accidents. Or maybe Neptune for inexplicable failures, gas leaks, that sort of thing. While Pluto was involved, suggesting intensity, it wasn't the specific kind of, say, fiery Mars-Uranus activation you might expect for a large-scale explosion. The Mars aspects we saw were far more personal, targeted, and related to conflict, not indicative of mass casualty accidents.
Okay, so the planetary signature was different. More targeted violence than mass chaos.
Correct. It also wasn't likely a former president's death, #3. While the Sun representing national leadership did have challenging aspects. They weren't definitively pointing towards, say, a natural end due to age or illness for a figure primarily associated with the past, like a former president. The intense focus was strongly on that seventh house figure, a public adversary, a partner in discourse, someone currently engaging with the nation's identity, not necessarily a past executive figure, symbolized purely by the 10th house.
Got it. So the focus was on a current active public figure involved in conflict, not necessarily an elder statesman passing away.
Exactly. Nor was it likely the current president announcing a divorce, #4, or a serious disease outbreak with border closures, #6. Yes, Venus relationships had aspects, but they were predominantly challenging squares from Mars. This indicates violence, conflict within relationships, or attacks related to values, not a consensual separation or partnership crisis. And for the disease outbreak, there just weren't strong indicators from the 6th house, health, daily routine service, or the 12th house, hidden things, institutions, but also illness, pointing to a widespread public health crisis requiring something like border closures. The focus was elsewhere.
Right, the relevant houses weren't lit up for that.
Precisely. Furthermore, it wasn't a stock market crash, #7. The second house, related to national resources and finance, did have some Pluto activity, but it wasn't dominated by the kind of severe hard aspects, like maybe a major Saturn-Uranus clash, that often accompany significant economic upheaval. The financial indicators weren't screaming crash, and finally, it wasn't the U.S. president declaring war, #8. While there was a lot of initiating, cardinal energy suggesting action, the seventh house emphasis, again, pointed strongly towards individualized conflict, a confrontation with a specific other. It wasn't activating the chart in a way that suggests a broad systemic declaration of war involving, say, the 4th house Homeland Security or the 10th house government declaration in a large-scale invasion context.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's clear when you break it down like that, how the astrological fingerprints, all those layers we talked about, pointed so directly to an individualized act of violence and assassination, and specifically targeting a public communicator, a significant voice like Charles Kirk, someone deeply connected to media, ideology, and public discourse. It lines up incredibly well. Wow. What an absolutely incredible deep dive into the cosmic blueprint of a nation and how it might reflect such a tragic event. The astrological analysis, which importantly was initiated through our rigorous blind guess experiment, really does paint a remarkably precise picture. It reveals this perfect storm, you could say, of planetary alignment centered right on September 10th, 2025, signaling a very specific kind of Mars-driven attack targeting a public communicator within the U.S.
Indeed. In this detailed look back, using these techniques, it doesn't just, show astrology's potential for analysis or foresight, maybe. It also offers a really profound lens into the U.S. Sibley Chart's enduring narrative, its ongoing story. It kind of reminds us that within the national psyche, encoded in that chart, certain themes, particularly around communication, ideological conflict, the potential for violence, vulnerability to hidden enemies, seem to recur. They're part of the pattern. The influences of Mars, combined with these themes of public identity, ideological battles, and those hidden forces from Neptune and Pluto, they all culminated astrologically in an event like the assassination of a figure like Charles Kirk. And the fact that the AI, when it was completely blind to the actual event, correctly identified an important American figure was shot, based solely on these complex calculations. Well, it really underscores the profound insights that might be available when we meticulously study these patterns.
It truly does. This deep dive is a powerful reminder, I think, of how deeply connected things might be, perhaps in ways we don't always consider. And while, yes, this was a retrospective analysis looking back after the fact, the rigor of the blind test gives it weight. It underscores the potential insights that can be gleaned when we pay close attention to these intricate celestial patterns. So, what stands out to you listening to this? What are you taking away from today's deep dive? What further questions does this raise for you about patterns of destiny, or maybe the inherent character of the nation as reflected in its chart? We invite you to consider this, mull it over, and perhaps explore the stars a little more yourself. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep digging for knowledge.